What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a minute. I have been busy, but I'm super excited to bring you this video today, and we're going to be covering singletons in Swift. So let's just go ahead and do a quick overview of what we're going to be covering in this video, guys. So we're going to do a quick overview of singletons. We're going to then hop into Xcode and do some code examples. Then we're going to come back to this presentation and go over some benefits and drawbacks of singleton patterns, and also what best practices with singletons are. And then we're going to look at some real world examples and continue learning what to do after this. So let's go ahead and just dive right into singletons, guys. What are they? So as we can see here, it's a design pattern used in software development to ensure that a class has only one instance throughout the lifecycle of an application and provides a global point of access to that instance. This is useful when exactly one object is needed to coordinate actions across the system. So that might not make a lot of sense right now. It will once we hop into the code and do some examples. So really quickly, let's look at some key characteristics of a singleton before we hop into the code examples, guys. So like we said before, it's a single instance. So only one instance of that class is created. So we can imagine how that could be helpful with things like memory management and controlling the instance creation process within the class itself. We also get global access. So this just makes things easier to access for us, right? Because we can access singletons globally, as we'll see once we dive into the code. And we also have controlled instantiation. So the class itself is responsible for creating and managing the sole instance, typically using a static method or property. So with all that being said, guys, let's go ahead and hop into Xcode now and do some examples with singletons so that we can better understand them. And then we'll come back to this presentation to wrap things up. So with Xcode opened up, guys, I already have a blank playground opened up. You should do the same. And you guys will notice there's a ton of other files here, and that's because this is continuing off of our fundamentals course that we have available on the website at stephancodes.com. So you guys can go ahead and check that out. The link is in the description. This is building off of both the programming fundamentals and the intermediate and advanced fundamentals class with Swift. So in that class, guys, we cover all of these things like solid architecture, memory management, generics, extensions, classes, and then the basics and all that stuff. So you guys want to check that out, make sure you head over to the website at stephancodes.com. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started with singletons, guys. So I am going to go ahead and just delete this stuff. And I'm going to make a class here called logger, guys. So let's imagine that I wanted to build a class that can log data for me throughout an application, whether it's like success messages or error messages or custom messages, whatever, right? So let's make some functions to do that. Let's say like log error, and let's just say print an error occurred. And then we can have another one for log success. Print event completed successfully. Yeah. So this is our logger, right? So let's then imagine that we had like other classes that need to implement this logger so it can log data for us, right? Because logs are pretty important in an application. It helps you understand what's going on or what's going wrong. So let's make like a class called like login manager. We'll have a func called login, and we'll just say print, or we'll just say like logger dot log success, right? So let's imagine we have a successful login, then we log our success. Okay, let's make another class called like signup manager. And we'll make a function called signup, and we'll say logger. And let's imagine something went wrong, right? We'll just say log error. Yeah. Okay. So as you can see here, guys, if I were to then create like let login equal my login manager, login dot login, something like that. And let signup manager equal my signup manager. And I said signup dot signup. And I went ahead and ran my code. You guys can imagine I'll just get these print statements back, right? Like nothing fancy. So what are some of the issues with this setup? Well, as you can see, guys, every time I need to use the logger, I have to create an instance of that logger. So as you can see, this won't behave very well at scale, right? Like I get my print statements back, everything is working nicely. But imagine if I had 1,000 different files in a super large project that needed to use this login manager, and I had to create an instance of that logger every single time I wanted to use it. that wouldn't be super effective or memory efficient, right? Like you're creating 1,000 separate instances of this logger when it's doing the same thing across the board, right? It's just logging these messages. So you could imagine that it would be better if we only had to initialize this logger one time, right? So that's where singletons come into play. So let's go over how to do that really quickly. So what we're going to do is just say static let shared equal this logger, okay? So now guys, what we're going to do is only access these methods through this shared instance on the logger. And this guarantees that the logger will only be created one time, and then we can use that single instance, hence the term singleton, across all the different components that need to use it. So we would then replace this, let me just go ahead and comment it out, with logger.shared.log success and logger.shared.log error. And if I go ahead and run this, nothing is going to look any different in terms of like our print statements. It's going to give us back the same thing, but it is now all being routed through this single instance here. So that is super helpful for our application in terms of memory allocation and management, guys. Now we have a single point of access. And as we said in the presentation before, we get global access to it as well. So we can globally access this logger from anywhere. Like I don't even have to be inside of a class. I can do this anywhere. And it just makes everything really convenient and more efficient. So really quickly, let's go over what this static keyword means, guys. So you'll notice that if I were to delete this, that my compiler is going to give me errors, right? And if I add it back, everything is fine. So essentially, guys, the static keyword in Swift is used to define type level properties and methods. So when a property or method is marked with static, it belongs to the type itself, meaning this logger class, rather than instances of that type. So it basically just ensures that we can use this singleton pattern, right? You don't need to know too much about it. Just know that if you want to make a singleton, guys, you need to utilize this static keyword here. So that's a great example of a logger. I do want to do one more thing just to prove to you guys that we're only utilizing a single instance. Then we're going to do one more example. Then we're going to hop back into the presentation to do a wrap up. So let's imagine we have an ID here, guys. So let's say like let ID equal uuid.uuid string. And let's go ahead here and say we want to print our uuid or our ID after both of these, right? So what I'm trying to get at here is to show you that this ID is going to be the same every time we use this logger. So let's see, I think we need to import foundation up at the top. And let's go ahead and run this again and see what this ID prints out as, right? So you guys are going to notice that it's going to be the same between these two use cases of our logger, even though we're using this logger in two completely separate components, right? You guys are going to notice that once this actually runs, right, you see that this ID is exactly the same across the two components. And if I were to go back to the old way of doing things, guys, so let me comment this back in and just add it there as well. Comment that out. Comment that out. So now we're going back to using multiple instances of our logger. Let's go ahead and run this guy. You guys are going to notice that this is from the previous iteration. Let that go ahead and run. Right, so now you get two completely different IDs, and that means we have initialized our logger on two separate occasions, right? So before, it was the same ID. After, without the use of a singleton, the IDs are different because we have created two separate instances of that logger class, whereas with the singleton, we were utilizing a single instance of it. So that should just prove to you guys that we are, in fact, only using one instance of the logger. So now that we've covered that, guys, let's go ahead and move on to example number 2. So let's imagine that we have some API configuration in our application, and we want to be able to either point to our production environment or like a test environment, right? So I'm just going to copy and paste this enum that I have here, guys. You can pause the video and type it out if you want, or you can just follow along. So here's my API environment, right? I have production and development, and then I have some endpoint associated with those things. So I can either point to my production environment or my development environment. And this is very common in production apps when you want to be able to either point to production or development when you're either testing or you are using the live production version of your app, right? Okay, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and make a class here called API configuration. And we are going to create a static instance of it. Well, actually, let's go ahead and create our environment first. We're going to say var environment, which is our API environment. So we need to initialize this thing with some environment. And you guys can just go ahead and type out init. It should cover that for you. And then I want to say static let shared equal my API configuration. And I want to pass in like production, right? Okay, so guys, how is this going to help us out? Why do we want to use a singleton here? So let's imagine we had two services. Okay, let's imagine we had a service to fetch stocks for us and a service to fetch crypto for us, right? And we want to be able to either point to production or development. So let's go ahead and say let environment or config rather equal API configuration dot shared, and we have a function to fetch our data. And it's going to have this print statement here. Look at the endpoint and get stocks, right? And then our crypto service is going to do the same thing. It's just going to go and get our crypto data, right? So then we can say, hey, let's do this really quickly. I know I'm copy and pasting a lot, guys. I just want to move things along. So we have service 1 is equal to our stock service. We say fetch data, and service 2 as well, right? So if I go ahead and run this, as you guys can imagine, it's going to give us back these expected print statements. So we're going to go over why it's better to use a singleton here in just a second. So let's wait for this guy to run. Okay, so as we can see, guys, we're going to our production endpoint, getting stocks, and production endpoint, getting crypto. Okay, so what happens if I want to change my environment to development, right? So what I can do is go to my API configuration, and I can add a function here called update environment. It's going to look just like this. And whatever environment I pass in, I'm going to update my environment to be equal to that. So let's imagine I now go here and I say API configuration dot shared dot update environment, and I say dot development. And then I take these two lines of code and paste them here, just recalling those functions, and I go ahead and run it. You guys will notice that it now points to development in both of those environments, right? So let's imagine this at scale. Imagine I had 10 different services in my application, and I all need them to point to either production or development. Well, because I'm utilizing a shared instance here through the use of a singleton design pattern, anytime I update that shared instance, it's going to update the API configuration everywhere. So I don't need to go into each individual service and update it individually. Or with the use of dependency injection, which we're going to cover in another video, I don't have to pass that along to each individual component that wants to utilize that API configuration. So we can really see the benefits of singletons here, guys. And another thing that you'll see with singletons is the use of private initializers. So why do you make this private? Well, this essentially just ensures that the singleton can only be created here. So it's just another layer of protection. You guys will notice that if I don't have that, I could actually go here and say, let config to equal API configuration. And I can actually initialize it here, right, with an environment. And then that could really confuse things. Like a developer could make this mistake, right? And then you could say, hey, do config to, and then you might have one of your services pointing to development or production when you don't want it to. Whereas if I now mark this initializer with private, you guys are going to notice, hey, I can't create this thing because the initializer is set to private. So that's something very common that you will see with singletons. You guys could do that in the logger as well. You want to make the initializers private because you want to ensure that this is the only time the class is getting initialized, and that you guarantee that way that you will only ever be using that single instance. So as we said, oops, I deleted the wrong thing. As we said before, guys, it also gives us global access. So we noticed that I could just update the environment here. That will take place everywhere I need it to update, or update everywhere I need it to update, and then I can resume business as usual. But now I want us to hop back into our presentation to go over some of the benefits and the drawbacks of singletons, because I'm sure you guys may have heard before, some people hate singletons. Some people say never ever use them. They are the work of the devil, right? But obviously they are used in production apps all the time. Apple uses singletons in their code, so they do have a time and place. You just have to make sure you use them correctly. So let's hop back in to our presentation to cover that. Really quickly, just as a quick recap, guys, we can see that we covered all of these points, right? We had control instantiation, global access, and single instance when using our singletons. So now let's go over sort of when to use them. We also covered this with things like logging, maybe cache managers, network managers, which we kind of covered, or configuration managers, right? Like ensuring that configuration settings are consistent across an entire application. You might want to use a singleton so that you have global access to that from anywhere within your app. You'll see that in app delegate code in iOS apps where you have like UI application.shared. And that's a perfect example of when using a singleton can really benefit you. But anyway, guys, let's go over the benefits of them. As we saw, global access was a huge benefit. Consistency, another huge benefit, ensures that there's a consistent instance of the class throughout the application, avoiding issues with multiple instances holding different states. So if we have to initialize something more than once, and they could both have differing states, which might make things really confusing for us and make state management more difficult. And then another thing we saw, especially with our logger, was resource management. So it helps manage shared resources such as database connections or network managers more effectively. You're not creating multiple instances of things, rather you're using a single instance, which is better for memory management. And guys, now the drawbacks, right? As you can see, we have 5 major points here with the drawbacks. So ironically, we see that the global state, which was one of our benefits of singletons, is also a drawback. So singletons do introduce global state into an application, which can make it harder to reason about and can lead to hidden dependencies between different parts of the code. So anytime you have a global state, guys, and you have multiple things updating that single thing, it can get confusing. So another one is testing difficulties. Singletons make unit testing challenging because they hide dependencies and maintain states across test. So that's a big drawback of singletons, where dependency injection comes in to save the day, which we will go over in another video. But essentially, guys, with singletons, it can lead to tests that interfere with each other or require complex setup and teardown logic. Singletons make things harder to test. Concurrency issues are also another one. If a singleton's not implemented correctly, it can lead to concurrency issues such as race conditions, especially in multi-threaded environments. So that one's a little more complex, guys. But essentially, singletons can cause concurrency issues. Another one is hidden dependencies. They can lead to code that is less modular and more tightly coupled, as different parts of the application become dependent on the singleton instance. So this is where, once again, something like dependency injection comes in handy, which we'll be covering in another video. Another one is inflexibility. So as you guys saw with that private initializer, it can make your singleton really inflexible if you need to have custom init parameters, right? So if anything needs to be passed in to that singleton class from another component, you can't really do that. For example, different configurations. It can be hard to refactor your code. So those are some of the main drawbacks of singletons, guys. So in our final slide, let's go over best practices. So as I said, singletons do have a time and place. It's not like you can never use them, right? If that was the case, no major company like Apple would use singletons, right? They would make sure they got rid of them or never use them in the first place. So here's a couple points to make sure you're using them the right way. So lazy initialization ensures that the singleton instance is created only when needed. You want to make sure you are keeping an eye out for thread safety. So ensuring that your singleton implementation is thread safe, especially if accessed from multiple threads. So if you have multiple API calls happening that are accessing or utilizing that singleton, you need to make sure you're doing it in the right way. Which sort of leads into the next point with concurrency issues. You can have race conditions, especially in a multi-threaded environment, which we talked about. And when possible, you want to use dependency injection, guys, which we are going to cover in another video, to pass that singleton instance around rather than accessing it directly within classes. This makes makes testing easier and reduces hidden dependencies. And clarity of purpose, right? Use singletons judiciously and only when there is a clear need for a singleton instance. Next up, to wrap this video up, guys, I want to show you some real world examples of when singletons are used. So let's hop back into Xcode really quickly. So let me just get this out of the way. So here is a Tinder tutorial app that I have, guys, and I've hopped into this app delegate file. So Something that we talked about before was the use of having like shared access to a UI applications configuration. So for example, anywhere I could go here and say UI application dot shared, and then I could say dot, and you guys will notice that there is a lot of stuff I can access here. And the benefit of this, guys, is you can imagine that if I have some very distant child view, right? Like I go all the way down to an edit profile screen or something, and I need to access something about the UI application, I don't want to have to pass that all the way down the chain, right? I can go and say UI application.shared and have global access to that and access it from anywhere in my app. So something you could potentially look at is the application state, right? So you could say, hey, if it equals .inactive, then go ahead and perform some operation. If it becomes active again, go ahead and do something else. And you can access this globally across the entire application, guys. So that does show you a really good example of how singletons can be used in production code. Obviously, that is production because it is used in Apple's internal code. Another great example of where you can check out singletons and more on dependency injection, guys, is in my new Messenger Pro Plus course. So this new tier of Pro Plus courses teaches you how to build scalable production-ready apps like the Pros from complete scratch, guys, that can handle millions of users. And one of my favorite parts of this course is refactoring the entire authentication module, as we see here, from using a singleton design pattern to a dependency injection pattern. And then from then, actually writing unit tests and seeing how dependency injection helps us do that. So make sure you go ahead and check out our Pro Plus tier of courses. As I said, guys, it's crucial for taking your skills to the next level if you're serious about building production-ready applications. And the Messenger Pro Plus course is the first of many to come. I'm currently working on Instagram next. And if you guys want, you can become a member on the site to get access to all of our courses. The Pro Plus courses are not included in the memberships, guys. I want to make that clear. They have way too much value in there for me to include them in a $40 a month membership. But you can access all of the pro courses with the membership, as well as all of our app templates. So you get access to all of these courses, guys, for that low cost of $40 a month. I'm also going to be introducing a free trial soon, so you guys can try things out and decide if you like them before you have to start paying money. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure you guys sign up here at AppStuff as well to make sure you get those email notifications, and make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave comments below with any more content that you want to see in the future. And I really want to thank you guys for sticking around and watching this video. Hope you learned a lot. In the next one, we're going to be covering different design patterns. And guys, if you want the full experience of all these design patterns, make sure you go and check out the Intermediate and Advanced Fundamentals course. That's what all of this is getting tacked onto. This is just a free preview you get in the YouTube videos. So once again, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time. Peace out.